Dan, we're going to be talking about what is often, I think, the opposite of what most people talk about. And historically, with performance marketing and Facebook ads, meta ads, PPC, things like that, everything's always about scale.
It's the sexy
grow,
word,
grow,
isn't
grow,
it?
grow. Yeah, it is. And it's the thing that everyone likes to talk about. We're going to be talking about cutting spend back, or rather finding efficiencies in spend, which I think at the moment, given the economic climate, is a really important topic to discuss.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of businesses who are tightening up on budgets, paying a bit more additional attention or scrutiny to how their budgets are being spent. And sometimes scale is the thing the business needs, and that's a very valid thing, and everyone loves to get involved with that. Sometimes the business needs to find efficiencies or cut costs, and it's still a very, very valid task.
Yeah. It's still important, and I think you should always be looking for efficiencies even when you are scaling anyway.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of taking that step back if you do need to have those difficult conversations internally to kind of find the right efficiencies that still aren't knee-jerk reactions that actually have a negative impact on the business overall.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people do, I think, I guess the context to this is if you're cutting back spend, things aren't going as planned.
Yeah, we're all having a rough year, right?
Which is never kind of what anyone wants, right? But you have to be able to deal with it properly. I think a lot of people fall into a knee-jerk reaction. If they've got to cut financer, you've got to cut your ad spend by 30%. I just dial everything back by 30%. Or sometimes just pause the ad spend. Or, there are loads of scenarios, but you have to consider it really carefully, because if you get it right, and let's say we've got this 30% figure that we need to cut back, if you get the right 30%, and you can identify areas that aren't being particularly efficient, then you can potentially get the same amount of revenue from less spend, which is a massive win, because the business then has budget freed up for other areas, or can reinvest in what's working, or, that's a really good thing. But it's about finding the right areas.
Yeah, exactly.
But as an agency, it's weird because every brief we get is typically about growth or scale.
Yeah, you never really... I mean, I've been here for 4 years. I don't think we've ever had anything where it's like, can you help me find the most efficient way to run these campaigns? I've got this budget left for the rest of the year. Yeah. We don't really ever get that.
No,
which is interesting.
It's rare. Yeah, rare. It is rare. To give one example, I guess from quite early on running this business, we got a brief in for a PPC audit, and the owner of the business was questioning the cost of this audit. Let's say it was just an example. Let's say it's $4,000 for an audit or something like that. The owner was questioning it. It's but last month alone, this particular account had wasted $8,000 on a keyword that was completely irrelevant. And you're like,
the value of just finding that straight away is...
That's a good return and well worth spending a bit of money on, because next month you won't waste the $8,000. And then that's $8,000 that could be spent on the campaigns that are delivering a return or other activity.
And it's like the other thing, you've mentioned on one of the podcasts.
But no one wants to spend money on this stuff.
And you've mentioned this on the podcast before as an example of you had a client, like a booking company, and you identified just a select amount of keywords that actually drove pipeline revenue. Yeah. So it's like looking at that as efficient in that audit as well would make such a difference. Look, only focus on these. You can cut back on these, saving you X amount of money. Yeah. But you're going to make the same amount of revenue. Yeah. And like you said, we can invest that into another channel that's going well, another part of the business, or bank it if it just needs to be banked and put into a black hole somewhere.
That's a really good point. With that's a very B2B or lead gen specific thing, isn't it? Because if let's say you're tasked with cutting back spend, if you don't have pipeline data, you don't know what keywords or search terms are driving pipeline value and like eventual revenue, then you're just looking at form completion volume, which is often the opposite to what's driving
Exactly.
like lead quality and value. So having the right data in front of you is first thing, isn't it? Because otherwise you're going to make decisions. You could cut off terms that don't look great on the surface, but they're actually the terms that are generating the best stuff. So the right data is important. Before we started talking on air, you mentioned the difficulty around Pmax, which I think if we're talking about data, this is an important point, because automated campaign, we'll talk about Pmax as an example. Previously, let's say 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was actually quite easy to find areas of wasted spend, because you go into your search terms report, look at your terms that were spent over a certain amount of money, got over a certain amount of clicks, generated no conversions.
It was quite black and white at
There's
times,
your
wasn't
list,
it? Exactly.
right? Kind of, but that, you know, there's a good starting point at least. With Pmax, you don't get that level of insight.
No.
So finding areas of wasted spend when your view on the data has decreased is difficult.
Yeah. And it's a lot, like you said, it's difficult, it's a lot harder, but it's like looking in the right areas. And I think that's why it's important sometimes it'd be great for us to get briefs on looking for efficiency on Pmax, because we were talking earlier about looking at your product data. There's so many products that have impressions, X amount of spend, no conversions. Do that task straight away, you'll find there's probably about 20% of the products that actually are converting for you.
Yeah.
X amount are not. You might still want to spend some money on them for awareness, but you could start re-looking at how you're being most efficient with that spend.
Yeah.
And it's just being smarter and looking at different things in a different way, probably, with automation.
Yeah.
And I think the difficult thing with AI and automated campaigns is how long do you give something, and when do you stop trusting the machine versus your own intuition on efficiency? And I think that's the big pivot with those campaigns.
Yeah, definitely. By that you mean, so trusting the machine as in there's a learning period behind the campaigns, you're feeding it the right data, and you trust the fact that eventually it's going to come good, because it is step by step by step, isn't it?
Yeah, and like
in terms of ROAS or performance.
There was a thread on Twitter the other day, which essentially was saying,
or a thread on Threads.
Or a thread on Threads now. Yeah, it was basically I think they spent about $8,000. It was an Advantage Shopping Plus campaign on Facebook, so their version of Pmax.
Yeah,
and nearly 50% of the budget had gone on to one creative. It was converting well, but the ROAS was a lot lower, a bit lower than other ads that hadn't got as much spend.
Okay.
And you're looking at that and you're going, is that making the best use of my budget? 50% is going into this one creative. My return's not as good as some of these could be. But when do you go, well, Meta knows that this ad long term is going to be the best option for me, versus I might just want to put the brakes on that a little bit and to see if I can get a better return and be more efficient elsewhere. Yeah. And it's really difficult because you're kind of being told by all these reps and everything to like trust the system. Machines know more than us, but sometimes you just look at it and it looks so obvious that you need to make a decision.
Yeah.
That's also where your spend can just run away from you in these periods. And if your budget's being cut back, it's really important to have somebody that understands those campaigns, understands when to put the brakes on, essentially.
Yeah, but this is where experience kicks in.
Exactly.
And knowing, and that balance between your gut feel, your experience, and how to play the game in terms of playing to face Meta's benefits, right?
Exactly.
And learning process. Because you've got a decision, haven't you? You go, right, well, if it's taking 50% of the budget, it is driving conversions, but these other ads, they haven't had as much share yet, but they're still driving some. Do you switch off this thing, the banker?
Exactly.
Like the steady Eddie, it's going all right. At least it's doing something. Meta really likes it, clearly.
Yeah.
Or do you bin that and go with these ones that on the surface with less data look better, but would they
long-term scale?
Yeah. which is tricky, isn't it? It's actually quite a tough decision to make. I think if you're running campaigns, you've got loads of creative that's spending loads of money and not converting, that's easier, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because like, right, well,
it's when you're like, what will happen if I turn this off? And it's kind of like, it's when do you trust the system versus trust your gut, essentially. So that's like you said, expertise is key there, and like I think agencies are really well positioned from that point of view because they're across a breadth of accounts.
See so much information,
and they see so much information, and they might be doing the same sort of exercise of trying to be more efficient, or even when you're scaling, like you're trying to find the best, the winners, and it's the same approach if you're being efficient. So that's why I think, like we said at the start, it's more people, if they came to us with like, can you help me just streamline this down? What would you recommend? We could take an audit and do it, and we've got such a wider like range of what we can benchmark against. So I think that's really important. And then I think the last point on the AI PMAX side of things is, if you are doing it in-house, they're so easy to set up now. If you've got limited knowledge, you go boom, boom, boom. Yeah, that's done. Let it run. And you keep pumping more and more money in because the ROAS looks really good. We've seen it. A lot of it can just be branded and certain things. And you may get to a certain point where you're trying to scale it, and because it's not really efficiently run or efficiently optimized in other areas, you can't push it. But then you're like, oh, social's not working. Let's turn that off and put more money into this shiny campaign that's working. Suddenly you've tried to be efficient, but your overall like growth is actually declining because of it. Because you just don't understand. You don't understand what you're looking at to be, and actually it's wasted spend because it's brand. They probably would have converted at some point anyway. Is it the most efficient use of the spend again, even if it looks on paper the best performer for your finance team, for example? Just understanding those nuances in that whole process of where can we cut back 30%, to your example earlier.
I do think there is a level of, what's the word? We'll try and pick the word carefully. Irresponsibility in how campaigns types like PMAX have been marketed. Because it's been pushed in the really easy to run.
Everything in one campaign.
It's all in one place. Don't worry about it. Just tell us what you want. Give us some money. We'll go and get it for you. And it's very clever because chances are it's going to deliver on the surface some good looking results because it kind of cannibalizes brand terms, and you have to be, getting an actual scalable PMAX campaign is very different to just getting something running and having some surface level numbers. So there are probably quite a lot of businesses that are spending money on PMAX campaigns that on the surface look really good, but aren't.
Exactly. Like, it's not, is the new customer acquisition growing? Debatable.
Exactly.
So, and it's just understanding it and having the experience to know what levers to pull on it again, if you're cutting back spend, like, okay, how do we make this more efficient? Right, we're running brand. Do we exclude the brand terms, which you can do easily now from this, because actually that's covered from other activity, and it's just coming up with that step back strategy on everything. Like, what do we need to do to cut back this 30%, but still be successful? And focus on the right things.
Definitely.
And that shiny number, I might say a ROAS of 30. If it's hard enough to explain to some people about the nuances on that, if you tell finance you're turning off a campaign with a ROAS of 30, they're like,
why are you doing that?
Why are you doing that? Because it's just, they don't understand. So it's important that you have people that can understand
the intricate details of
intricate detail and articulate it easily for everyone to understand when you're making that cuts as well.
Definitely. Other common areas of wasted spend, I think one of the big things that often turns up when we're getting a new account or if we're running an audit are people spreading themselves too thin. By that, I mean either there's tons of campaigns spending £2 a day, therefore none of them are getting out of a learning process. There's not enough data going through anything, and therefore none of them get a chance to do anything. Right? That's mistake number one. Mistake number two is, so you've got 20 campaigns running. You see this quite a lot, actually. 20 campaigns running, but only 1 or 2 of them have actually got a good return.
Yeah.
And those 2 have got plenty of search impression share left or audience availability left. Therefore, by stop spending on those,
Spend on
max
those.
out those, then start broadening out. And I think that's a really, really big thing.
Yeah.
Really, really big thing.
Yeah. It's kind of just, we see it all the time because I think you want to cover, especially if you've got sales teams or different markets, or there's other business goals where you're like, we need to do this, this and this.
Yeah.
It's really easy to make a Google Ads structure get really broadened out really quickly if there's a lot of stakeholders involved.
Yeah.
So like you said, it's like the goal of this is performance marketing, like the performance, and unless you've got some awareness goal, but most of the time it comes down to a MQL number, so cost per MQL, or a ROAS, or cost per acquisition.
Yeah.
And like you said, if those 2 campaigns are not being efficiently run, so we know if we can't answer the question, what's the most we can spend on this campaign at an efficient return, and are we and if we're not maxing that out, why? That's where the budget should be going. Not
Yes.
oh, let's try this over here, but we'll do it half-assed and do it with £10 a day.
Yeah.
Because somebody wants to focus on this area, for example. I think it's like you said, doubling down on.
Spend the most you can spend on what's working until you hit that ceiling.
Yeah, until you see that curve go down.
Before you start running loads of other
Exactly.
stuff. It's simple, really, isn't it? It's just budget discipline.
It's the same with channels as well. Like, oh, we need to go over there and go on to TikTok because everyone's doing it. We need to go on to, oh, this is going well, so let's go on social. It's like, if you've got 1 or 2 channels that are working really well, are you maximising the full potential of what you're already running there?
Yeah.
If you are, cool, look at other channels. If you're not, and you're cutting back from an efficiency point of view, where's the winners in those platforms, and just double down on.
Yeah.
Those.
I think all of this has to come with the caveat that experimentation is good.
Yeah,
there's such a fine line, isn't there?
Yeah, because I'm a big believer. You just always, even if you're cutting back on spend, have a percentage of your budget allocated to testing, experimentation, because otherwise you're going to stand still. And when you get to the period where you do want to push it again, you're kind of like, well, where do we start? So
then that's intentionally spent on activity that might not generate a positive return.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. And then if you're running PMax or PMax shopping, or like any dynamic ads on Meta with a catalog, making sure that, if you've got 10,000 products in your catalog, focus on the ones that sell.
Yeah.
Because so much of that spend will be going to products that don't really sell, might have a really low value, therefore they're never going to generate a positive return. So being selective over the products you promote, if you've got a decent volume of them, it's relatively easy to segment them out on both platforms. That's an obvious one as well, isn't it?
They're called zombie products.
Zombie products.
The phrase is used these days, which is like they're just sleepwalking. They're around. They're not doing anything. But
like the dawn of the dead.
They're just dawn. Exactly. What's their purpose? Like you don't have to, like you said, just because you've got 10,000 products,
you have to run them all.
You don't have to run them all.
No.
So
it's the same as like if you're advertising in the US, you don't have to advertise to every state.
No. If you know on your GA4 data, there's 4 states that convert probably 80% of your revenue. Why are you going after like some of the ones that have like 1% of your overall revenue?
Yeah.
At a time when you're trying to be more efficient and cut back, go where the people are, the people that like your product, the people that convert, and get the most out of what you know.
Yeah.
That's the other thing with this, right? In
focus.
When you're cutting back or you're trying to be more efficient, it's focus and going after what you really know and understand.
Yeah.
And are you getting everything you can out of those areas?
Yeah, definitely. But I think that sums it up nicely. Is the focus on what's working, but the difficulty is that balance between, if you just go and take a hacksaw to an account, you're probably going to do yourself more harm than good, because you'll cut the learning process. You don't want to kind of sacrifice your budget for the learning process, and it's really intricate, isn't it? It's really difficult.
Like just talking about it, you can get it can be quite simple. How we say like do this and do this, but actually when you get into the nitty gritty, there are trade-offs in certain areas when you're making those bigger decisions anyway.
I think the main point is it's like just be very well considered. If you have to cut budget, be considered about it.
Yeah.
Be thoughtful about it and try and cut areas that are inefficient.
Because if you think,
but
like,
be careful.
We always have conversations where we really analytically step back and go, what are the ones that we need to scale?
Yeah, you do this when you scale, don't you?
You do this when you scale, but you never do it the other way. But actually, the process is very similar.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. You're just going the other way.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just that probably being even more refined. Like, instead 100%. Of like carrying a campaign that has got a decent return, it's like, well, let's just focus on the next layer up instead. And it's just doing the exact same process and analytical thinking than you would if you were scaling, but it's not as sexy, and no one wants to really.
It's not as fun, is it?
No one wants to be moving backwards. They want to be moving forwards, but sometimes
which is understandable.
Needs must. The way we are at the moment, like
it's still a valuable thing for the business.
Exactly, and if you can prove that value, the conversations you can then have when you can ramp up again.
Yep. And you will be in a better position to do it, won't you? Obviously, if anyone's listening to this and wants a hand, let us know. I think the best way to deal with this, if you're going to outsource it or work with an agency partners, it's an audit. It's a second pair of eyes, and it's look, here's how we'd recommend you approach it, and that can be implemented in-house or with a current agency or anything like that. So if anyone does have any questions about it and would like to talk to us, then please do feel free.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Dan.
Cheers, John.
And thanks everyone to listen for. Why can I never ever say that?
You've done it so many times.
Everybody for listening. See you on the next episode. Cheers. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, please do come and subscribe. Join us for future episodes where we talk about the ins and outs of running paid media and driving improved conversions and revenue for your business. See you next time.